Good evening. This is Richard Williams. I want to just welcome you. Glad to have you. And also welcome all of our viewers from other different countries, UK, Canada, um, India, South Africa, the Netherlands, Sweden. Hey, glad to have you. Just want to ask you, please like, share, and subscribe. Talk about not living in a world of haste. Isaiah 28:16 said, "Therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, I lay in Zion a stone for a foundation, a tried stone, a precious cornerstone, a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not act hastily and not be in panic." Think about what the people here are refusing God's offer and they're acting hastily. Listen to what Isaiah says in chapter 30, verse 15. "For thus saith the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and returning in rest, you shall be saved, and quietness and trust shall be your strength, but you refuse." God is telling Israel, basically, don't go back to Egypt. Trust me. Assyria was coming in and they were going back to Egypt because Egypt had all these chariots, all these horses, and they were going to go back and depend on Egypt to help them in this plight. And what God is saying, don't act hastily. But yet they looked at the threat of the Assyrians. The Assyrians were just conquering one kingdom after another. And so they thought, we got to do something. But they didn't pray. They didn't seek God. They didn't even go back and look at their own scriptures and see where people like Hezekiah had the same threat before, and yet he trusted God and God delivered them. They were acting hastily. Now, David had to learn to wait, and 1 Chronicles 7:14 said, "Go tell my servant David, thus saith the Lord, you shall not build me a house to live in." David wanted to build the temple of God. Things were quiet, no more wars. He asked the prophet, and the prophet said, "Oh, David, do whatever in your heart." And then God spoke to that prophet and said, "That ain't what I said. Tell David he can't do it." David had been a man of war. His whole life had been of battles and fighting. And God said he's a man of blood. He can't. He said his son will. Now David could have blew up like an old toad frog and got mad and just sit down and did nothing. Because David was basically told, you can't do this. You just have to sit on the sideline and wait. Somebody else is going to do it. But you know what he did? He started preparing. He started gathering material. Solomon built the temple. But when you think about all the wealth, all the gold, all the silver, all the material that David gathered, the wood and all that, if Solomon had to do that plus build it, it would have taken him twice as long, if not more so. The reason he was able to build a temple as fast as he could is because his father had made preparations. You see, David had to wait. He couldn't do the actual building, but he could do the preparation, the pre-work, the planning to get into material. And sometimes God tells us to wait in our lifetime. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that God is preparing us to do something, and we just have to kind of sit still and wait. And that's not, like I said, it's not a bad thing. But while you're waiting, ask God, excuse me, what do I need to be doing? Now, sometimes we get the haste for other things. In Exodus chapter 17:2, so the people quarreled with Moses and said, excuse us, give us water to drink. Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? Now, they'd come out of Egypt, and think about this. They saw God bring the most powerful nation in that time, in that empire, in that world, to its knees. Egypt literally ran them out to get them away. They were so afraid of God. And yet now, here they are out in the wilderness, and, somebody got to look around and say, I don't see no water. Now, I'm sure there was water in the camp. People had barrels of water. I ain't saying they were just totally out of water, but there wasn't any water around. So, it only takes one person to start fussing. Next thing you know, it just kind of catches on, don't it? Have you ever seen that? You get one person fussing about something, next thing you know, someone else is fussing, and it just kind of trickles through. Well, it trickled through, and the next thing you know, they got a delegation going to Moses, gripe and say, we ain't got no water. They got in a haste. And that haste led them to quarreling and fighting. and accusing Moses and basically accusing God. Why didn't they just say, we need to get together and get a group of people. We need to pray. You know, we're going to run out of water pretty soon. We need to pray. What is God going to do? What does the Lord want us to do? Didn't do any of that. They just got together and got to fussing and fighting and doing all type of crazy things. Now, another thing, when we get into haste, it'll make us lose sight of what really matters. In Matthew 19, 13, 15 said, then little children were brought to him in order that he may lay his hands on them and pray. And the disciples spoke sternly to those who brought them. But Jesus said, let the little children come to me and do not stop them, for it is to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belongs. And he laid his hands on them and he went his way. They were heading to Jerusalem. The disciples did not understand that Jesus was going to die on the cross. They thought he was going there to establish a worldly kingdom, and they just did not have time for a bunch of kids. They were in a haste. They were in a hurry to get to that place of influence and power. And what really mattered, they didn't see it. I've seen a lot of people in a haste to climb the political ladder in church. And what really mattered, they didn't see it. They messed up in their lives. Because it's the things that really, what the world says is insignificant, it's not that important, that really matters. Those little children matter to Jesus. He says, to such as these that the kingdom of heaven belong. And so unless you come as a little child, you'll never enter the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to tell you something. You have to come with that humility. Now, what happens when we don't act hastily? Acts 21, verse 10 through 14, and said, while we were staying there for several days, a prophet named Agabus came down from Judea, and he came to us and took Paul's belt, bound his own feet and hands with it, and said, thus says the Holy Spirit, this is the way the Jews in Jerusalem will bind a man who owns this belt and will hand him over to the Gentiles. Now, Paul was going to Jerusalem. He was arrested. He did spend 2 years in prison there in Caesarea, then went to Rome. And the Holy Spirit is preparing Paul. He wasn't telling him not to go. He was preparing him for what was about to happen. That was the grace of God. And Paul had said, every city the Spirit bears witness that chains await me. Everybody else was saying, Paul, you need to run. Get out of here. Go somewhere else. They interpreted acting hastily. Paul, in the quietness of his spirit, said, don't you understand I'm ready to die for Jesus? Don't you understand that I know this is where I'm supposed to be? I know this is what I'm supposed to do. And the Lord even spoke to Paul. He said, Paul, just as you've spoken to me in Jerusalem, you will testify in Rome. In other words, Paul, you've done right. You testified. Rome was your next destination. Paul was not in a haste. A missionary many years ago went to Uganda, and after several years, he returned from his service, and a friend came to him and said, Jones, he said, what did you find at your station in Uganda? He said, man, I'm going to tell you something. He said, you wouldn't believe. He said, those people, he said, it was crazy. He said, they didn't care about nobody. There was no compassion. I've never seen people so hard. He said, if a child was crying too bad, mother just throw it on the ground, walk off and leave it. If an older man broke his leg, they'd leave him there on the side road to die. He said, what'd you do? Did he preach to him? He said, no. He said, I'll pick the kids up and take care of them. If a man broke his leg, I'd take it and mend it, and I'd take care of him and treat him. And he said, and eventually people started asking, why are you doing this? He said, then I could preach to them. He said, what happened? He said, well, when I left the church. In other words, I didn't get in a hurry to try to tell them where they were wrong. I showed them how to do what was right. I lived the gospel in front of them. And that's the most important thing. It's not always what we say that's the loudest voice that's heard, but it's our actions and the things that we do. Brother Richard saying good night, and may God bless you.